Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today we have an article for you from Spain.
That's right, and we're talking about a little bit of a climate change weather story, and our title today is Spain Struck by Deadly Floods.
These are becoming common all over the world.
They are, and we're dealing with this situation where when there's a lot of water coming your way, you have very few options, and I think none of them are very good, right? Because you need to save your own skin, but you've put a lot of your love and life into this particular property that is now being swallowed up by water.
Yeah, it's really awful. So in addition to floods, we have fires. We have all kinds of stuff going on. We have ice melting at the ice caps. So that's global weather change, global climate change.
So this is my 20th year in Taiwan, and I will say that I feel the weather has changed, but I don't feel it as conclusively as when I think of my home in the United States. Like, oh yeah, the weather is obviously different from when I was a child to an adult in the United States. Karen, from your experience, have you felt like significant changes in Taiwan and Taipei? I'm not certain I feel things are as different as I could say in America.
I know what you're saying, and my answer is yes, I do.
You feel it's different?
Because I was a student here in the 70s, long before you were here. The winters were extremely uncomfortable. They were just bitingly cold. They were really uncomfortable, and most houses have no insulation.
Right.
They may not have a heater. If you do, it's a small space heater, and it's not enough. The winters were miserable. But we moved back here in the 80s, and starting from about 85, the winters were not so uncomfortable. And as the years went by, they're just not a big deal now.
Yeah, I remember last year we had like super late typhoons. And that was a weird one for me because we had typhoons, I want to say, like all the way to Halloween last year. And to me, I had never experienced a typhoon in October. And so here we are. I think we all have stories probably from around the world. How has climate seemed to have changed in the past 40 years or so?
Right. So I'm from Minnesota, and the first thing people say is, oh, it's so cold there. And I go, yeah, it's true. And I just grew up with lots of snow and lots of cold, very long winters, like 8 months a year. So my daughter is living there now, and I have a sister there. And they're saying, gee, we didn't have much snow this year. Huh? What? And they were saying, this isn't right. And I'm thinking, you should be happy there's not so much snow. It's kind of miserable. But they're thinking, uh-oh, something's wrong.
Something's wrong. I agree. The Great Lakes don't freeze. I know back in my hometown, we had temperatures in the 20s in October for
Celsius.
like Halloween. Celsius, which is crazy
Celsius, wow.
Warm for late October where we're from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So same thing in Minnesota. Well, here is one pretty awful outcome, we assume, is from global warming that happened in Spain. Our title again is Spain Struck by Deadly Floods. In October 2024, the Mediterranean country of Spain was hit by deadly floods that claimed the lives of more than 200 people. Its eastern region received more rainfall in less than a single day than the entire country usually does in a year. This tragedy has led to widespread calls to identify those responsible, with many pointing to a failure to adapt urban infrastructure to extreme rainfall that many believe is being caused by climate change.
The flooding occurred during a period of the year when Spain is prone to storms known as Dana storms. This word is a Spanish abbreviation that means isolated depression at high altitudes. These storms form when cold autumn air moving south meets warm, moist air from the Mediterranean Sea. The mix creates high-altitude storm clouds, which can dump large amounts of rain over a short period of time.
Aside from natural causes, human factors are also believed to have contributed to the disaster. A building boom in the region has increased the density of structures, raising the risk of damage during severe storms, especially if sufficient preparations aren't made. Poorly planned construction has also reduced the land's natural drainage capacity, worsening the impact of heavy rainfall.
Criticism has also been directed at the delayed emergency response. The government failed to activate the main emergency alert system until well into the storm. although weather forecasts had predicted heavy storms a week in advance. Many believe that earlier notifications could have saved more lives and lessened the extent of the disaster.
Now, this is replaying over and over again in many parts of the world. We're starting to wonder, what did we do wrong? Well, when the warnings came out very long ago that we are not paying attention to global warming and not doing anything about it, that's when we started to do things wrong.
That's right. I remember as a child in the 80s hearing about the impending idea of melting ice caps. Those ideas were very planted very heavily into kids' heads because I think scientists knew at the time probably we're not going to feel the effects right now. And so it'll be up to us children as we grow older to really care about this, to have the political influence to make those changes. And I remember those ideas being pushed very clearly to us as very young children in elementary school.
I listened to a discussion on this on a podcast or the radio, and they said that it's typical of human behavior and human history, that we will get the warnings, we'll say, yeah, it's not that bad. We can still get by, just do things the old way, until you're pushed against the wall and you have no choice. Then suddenly we jump into action.
I think so.
And save the situation. They say that this has been the history of humans from the very beginning.
What's the phrase here? I'm struggling to find the phrase, but we react much more than anticipate.
Yeah, and wait to the last minute.
That's right.
Let's go back to the beginning. Our title again, Spain struck by deadly floods. Struck is the past tense of strike. That means to hit. Spain was hit by deadly floods, floods that caused many deaths, as we learned from the article, over 200. In October 2024, the Mediterranean country of Spain was hit by deadly floods that claimed the lives of more than 200 people. Now, before we started recording, Chris said to me, Mediterranean, I think Spain is just a European country. Well, I have a close friend who lives in Spain, has been there for more than 30 years. They strongly identify with being Mediterranean, having the Mediterranean lifestyle. It's kind of focused on olive oil. They use olive oil in cooking. They use fresh fruits and vegetables. They have lots of seafood. So a lot of things they really do identify with, and olives, things like that, as part of the Mediterranean lifestyle. So I think Mediterranean here is a good way to describe it.
And part of this, too, might be from my background. So I was a social studies teacher, and when I visualize the map of Europe, I kind of see like a picture of a textbook in my mind. That's just how I see it. And so I think of it also from the American history perspective, where Spain was part of like the slave trade. And I often think of like, this is part of the Atlantic Triangle trade. And I wonder if where I think of Spain as a European country is not a reflection of my own perspective on what Spain is. And so this is actually a little bit of an interesting insight where you have a Spanish friend saying, we are Mediterranean people, and here you have this American person with a fascination about history saying, you're clearly European.
Of course they're European. They absolutely identify with being European, but being Mediterranean is a really important part of their identity. So, was hit by deadly floods, and that was already in the title, except we said struck in the title, and that claimed the lives. So if something terrible happens and people die because of it, we can say this disaster claimed. That means it went and took something it thought belonged to it, and the people died. So it claimed the lives of more than 200 people.
That's right. And these are phrases you'll see often. You will see 200 dead. You will see claim the lives of 200. It's softer, but you will see killed. You will see these words, and pay attention to how they're used, when they're used, and the impact that the author is looking to go for. You will see these across. And an interesting way to examine this is if there's a particular story that really interests you, look at the way some newspapers frame different things, and you'll get a little bit of an insight in the way these are kind of shaped by people and how direct they want to be.
Now, I don't know about you, Chris, but when I see that it claimed the lives of people, I have an image in my head of the Grim Reaper.
Sure.
Do you?
I usually don't see that, but I know how you get there.
Okay, so Grim is spelled G-R-I-M. Grim. Grim is somebody who is very, very serious and quite harsh. Reaper is somebody who goes out and harvests the crops. So this is this very severe person going out and cutting down the grain. That's the image that we use for death coming to a person. The Reaper has come and claimed your lives. When I see claimed, it sounds like something a person does to another person. I see the Grim Reaper.
I've probably played too many video games, so I associate the Grim Reaper in other ways.
You'll have to tell me.
No, it's just he's a common character in a number of video games where you will go straight up and fight death. So the Grim Reaper is almost a video game character in my mind at this point.
That's really interesting. Its eastern region received more rainfall in less than a single day than the entire country usually does in a year.
What a line.
That is really a line. You have to really pay attention just to the grammar to parse this sentence correctly. Parse is P-A-R-S-E. That means to divide it up into shorter phrases and analyze each one and then pull them together. That's to parse a sentence, P-A-R-S-E. So its eastern region, that means the eastern part of the country that is close to France. In less than one single day, they got so much rain that it was more rain than they normally get in one entire year. Parts of Spain are extremely dry.
That's right. And it's more rain than the whole country gets.
Yeah.
We're just getting a small part in less than one day. That is an incredible amount of rain. So October 2024 was the wettest month in Spanish history. On average, they get an equivalent of 14.7 centimeters of rain. That's more than double the normal value.
That's right. And this friend of mine in Spain was often telling us about the misery of drought. They were really having trouble with drought for many years, and then this happens. This tragedy has led to widespread calls to identify those responsible, with many pointing to a failure to adapt urban infrastructure to extreme rainfall that many believe is being caused by climate change. Now, this is a doozy of a sentence. Doozy is D-O-O-Z-I-E. D-O-O-Z-I-E. If something is really big and kind of difficult and surprisingly difficult, we say, wow, that's a doozy. So this is a doozy of a sentence because we are trying to follow the chain of blame here.
And this is a weird one for me, too, because when I read this, identify those responsible. It's
Who did it? Whose fault is it?
Yeah, like who exactly are we pointing our fingers to?
Right.
But and it's like, well, climate change is this kind of overall societal problem. But I understand that, like, when something ridiculous like this happens, someone is going to play the scapegoat. Someone is going to get blamed for these problems that happen. And I when I read this sentence, I thought of a single decision made in British history that was really transformative. So there's this failure to adapt urban infrastructure to extreme rainfall. What this means is, are the sewers big enough to take in all this water and drain properly? Sewers are extremely expensive to build. They are very disruptive to local businesses, and fixing them later down the road is even worse.
You have to do a lot of digging.
You are going to disrupt a lot of lives for a very long time and make people very unhappy. When the London sewer systems were being built, they actually originally designed this very small system. And the guy was like, I forget his name. He's like, you know what? This city's going to keep growing. Let's double the size. And they were
thank goodness for that.
So mad at this guy. And today, they could still handle the heavy loads that London prepares.
That's
and it's
amazing.
just something you need to think ahead of. If you're going to be planning and designing a city, you need very big sewers because you don't know what future disasters will bring.
Do you remember about what year that was or what period?
This was like before the 1900s. This is I want to say
late
1870s. Yes, it was. London was already a very large city, and they're going to upend everything. And they're like, if we're going to do this, we're going to do it once, and we're going to do it right. And then they did it even bigger. It's an amazing piece of foresight. I want to say we talked about this at some point in the past.
Maybe. But this is amazing. And whenever somebody proposes something like this, people will say, no, it's going to cost more. It's going to take longer. We're already past deadline and stuff. There will be very strong opposition. So if you can put that through, that is pretty amazing. Okay, next paragraph.
The flooding occurred during a month of the year when Spain is prone to storms known as Dana storms.
All right, so I've prepared the original Spanish for it, and I'm going to read it for you and see if you can follow it. It's depresión aislada en niveles altos. Depresión is a depression like in English. Aislada, you can hear the word island in there, and it means isolated. The next word is N-E-N, and that means either in or at. It means at here. Niveles. Nivel means your level. For example, you have a high level of Spanish, that's nivel. And here it also means altitudes. And altos, we have alto singers. That's women with a lower voice. Altos means high. So depresión aislada en niveles altos. There you go. You've learned some Spanish.
All right. Well, pick up your blue pen and underline is prone to. And this just means it's more likely to happen. This is an excellent phrase. Some children are accident prone. They like to break things and bump into things and
They
cause
don't
trouble.
like to. They just do.
They just
They're
do
not
it.
paying attention.
All right. This word is a Spanish abbreviation that means isolated depression at high altitudes. And as Karen so expertly explained to us.
Yeah, Dana, that's what it means. It's actually 5 words, but they don't put the E in there.
These storms form when cold autumn air moving south meets warm, moist air from the Mediterranean Sea. So this is setting up to something I think Karen and I are very familiar with. So we have warm, wet air, it's pulled out, and we're going to create big storms here. The mix creates high-altitude storm clouds, which can dump large amounts of rain over a short period of time. So Karen, we're thinking wet water reaching cold air up high, and now you have these big storms, lower the temperature about maybe 25 degrees Celsius, and what do we have?
Sleet.
We have like lake effect storms. This is basically the lake effect that we experienced in the United States over Spain. It just so happens that theirs happened in the autumn, and this, because it's warm, it turns into heavy rain. Where Karen and I are from, this turns into colossal amounts of snow. Like
snow is one
snow.
thing. I can manage the snow. It's the sleet that's really scary.
I agree. Here's a thing where you've been living in the north for a long time. It's like, 2 meters of snow.
Yeah,
I can deal with it.
I can handle it.
You can just stay inside. You're fine.
You're not
right?
going to slip usually if you're paying attention.
But that really cold, wet rain that's just turning to ice, terrible.
When it's raining, it's miserable, but you really have to worry about going outdoors after the rain when things freeze. Everything is covered with just a layer of very slippery ice. I've told this story before, but my sister used to live on a small hill, and I was driving back to get back to her house, and the car had to go up sideways to get up the hill because it is so difficult to navigate. And so many people will break limbs in these weather conditions. It's so dangerous.
And if you have an accumulation of this cold, wet snow, it's called heart attack snow because it's so heavy. And moving it could put a very heavy strain on your body. We're talking about snow in here, but really what we're largely getting to is that we understand this crazy effect of weather. You have warm, wet water because water retains its heat much longer than air does. And then you have this kind of colder, drier air up high. And when they mix, because we're looking for equilibrium, we're looking for balance, what this does is create big storms very quickly. And it's not something you experience as much in Taiwan because the oceans so insulate everything around it that things remain more balanced.
That's right. And Chris mentioned moving the snow. Why would you have to move the snow? Well, if you live in an apartment here, you don't have to worry about that stuff. Someone else is doing it. But if you live in an individual home, you have to go out and shovel the snow. And that's where the heart attacks usually occur. Okay, next paragraph. Aside from natural causes, human factors are also believed to have contributed to the disaster. Okay, now we're getting down to it. So people have done something that caused this to happen. A building boom in the region has increased the density of structures, raising the risk of damage during severe storms, especially if sufficient preparations aren't made. So in this case, if it's storms, first of all, you have to be able to withstand the winds, like the windows, and the structure itself has to be sound. If it's kind of a creaky wooden structure, it's not going to do very well. And in addition, you're going to have all of that rain. You have to, like Chris said, you have to have sufficient drainage.
That's right. And if you have a lot of concrete, you're not going to have a lot of absorption through the soil, too. So if you're in a farm field, you might have flooding, but the earth can hold quite a bit of water, actually. However, if you have a lot of density of buildings, more concrete, more sidewalks, more streets, more blacktop, you have less water absorption. And if you don't have good sewer systems, they're going to overflow and you're going to have flooding.
And this is exactly what happens in Taiwan quite often when people cut down all the trees in order to grow something else. There is not enough vegetation there to hold the water back. poorly planned construction has also reduced the land's natural drainage capacity, worsening the impact of heavy rainfall.
So, in other words, because of this poor planning and poor construction, the total amount of water that can be held is much lower.
Our last paragraph.
Criticism has also been directed at the delayed emergency response.
Yeah, a lot of times our emergency personnel are just not ready. They didn't know something of this scale was going to happen.
The government failed to activate the main emergency alert system until well into the storm, although weather forecasts had predicted heavy storms a week in advance.
So sometimes we're just not paying attention.
And I think, too, people hate the false alarms, like, oh, there's going to be a big typhoon, and then it never arrives and you look incompetent. But to me, this is a much preferable situation than you decide not to pull the trigger, you decide not to activate the alarms, you decide to say, listen, everyone go to work, and then it's a real disaster. And then people's lives are at risk. I get that it's frustrating to business owners and many people to have typhoon days or something where a storm doesn't actually hit directly into, say, Taipei, which we've had experienced recently.
That's right.
But to me, the alternative is much better. And I think we've both experienced snow days where this has happened too, where the big snowstorm never arrived and people complain. But it's like, hey, listen, I would much rather take this than kids getting stuck in school buses and not able to get home.
And we humans often don't believe something until it happens. Because right before that mega typhoon we had back in October, I was thinking, it's probably not going to be that bad. That was a monster typhoon.
It was a big one. It was the biggest in a while.
Many believe that earlier notifications could have saved more lives and lessened the extent of the disaster. And that is most certainly true. So if you are forewarned, you can leave first, try to save some of your possessions, but that was not done.
And, you know, that leaves people kind of in a tough situation. Although I will say, I don't know about other societies. I think of like big hurricanes in Florida in the United States. And they're like, this is going to be a really big storm, everybody. You need to get out. You need to prepare for evacuation. Leave the area. Secure your house and home. And people are like, nah, I'm all right.
I'm good. Yeah, we humans, I think, are just like that. Unless we are currently experiencing it and seeing it with our own eyes, we just don't believe it.
You know who I feel like should take every warning super seriously? Everybody in Hualien. You guys get slammed in Hualien so much. Taidong and Hualien. If they're like, listen, it's going to be a little breezy today, lock down everything because it always comes for Hualien and Taidong. I sympathize with you guys so much.
Yeah, that's true. I've heard so many people talk longingly about, oh, I'd love to retire in Taidong, and some of them have done it. But man, you better be ready.
Yeah, in fact, I have two friends that are thinking about working remotely. They have the skills to work remotely, and they were talking about doing it from Hualien. And I was just like, just be ready for tough times because at least recently, it seems like it's really been going after Hualien. The whole world is out to get them.
So global warming is real. Keep that in mind. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.